Nothing happens for days. How waiting becomes a real punishment inside ADX Florence. Inside ADX Florence, the most secure prison in the United States, punishment does not always arrive as force, noise, or confrontation. Sometimes it arrives as nothing at all. There are days when no door opens, no voice calls a name, no movement breaks the stillness. Time does not move forward here the way it does outside. It stretches, thins, and repeats itself until minutes feel identical to hours, and hours lose any meaning beyond survival. In this place, inmates are not just confined by walls and steel. They are confined by waiting. Waiting to be told what happens next. Waiting for a sound in the hallway. Waiting for confirmation that the world beyond the cell still exists. There is no countdown clock, no schedule posted on the wall, and no guarantee that today will be different from yesterday. The uncertainty is intentional, because when nothing happens, the mind fills the silence on its own. ADX Florence does not rely on constant punishment. It relies on delayed answers, withheld movement, and long stretches where nothing changes at all. This documentary explores how waiting, controlled, extended, and enforced, becomes one of the most powerful tools inside America's most isolated prison, not through violence, not through chaos, but through time that refuses to pass. What happens to the human mind when days blur together, when anticipation replaces action, when waiting becomes a sentence? This is the unseen punishment of ADX Florence, and it begins the moment nothing happens. The silence before the transfer, entering ADX Florence. The moment an inmate receives a transfer notice, a quiet tension begins to build. It is not the noise of alarms or the clatter of doors that marks the start of this journey, but the stillness in every corridor. Days, sometimes weeks, stretch before them where nothing changes, yet everything feels different. There are no explanations, no schedules, and no assurances. Only the waiting. Waiting for instructions. Waiting for movement. Waiting for the moment when the steel and concrete will swallow them whole. As the inmate packs their few possessions, the mind begins its silent work. Every object, every corner of the cell, becomes a point of focus. The uniform, the bedding, the personal effects, all of it is reviewed, reconsidered, rearranged. There is a strange clarity in these moments, born from the absence of distraction. And yet, beneath this calm lies a simmering tension, a nervous energy that cannot be released because there is nothing to act upon. In ADX Florence, the mind becomes a battleground long before the body ever moves. The journey to the prison is always deliberate. Guards move in coordinated silence. Vehicles depart at exact times, and protocols govern every motion. The inmate sits, watches, and waits. Each turn of a wheel, each passing mile, is measured. Outside, the world continues, unaware, unconcerned. Inside, time stretches unnaturally, marked by the quiet repetition of footsteps, the occasional glance at the clock, and the anticipation of what is to come. Upon arrival, the first impression is not violence, nor chaos, nor the sounds of confinement. It is the immense quiet. The steel doors loom taller than expected. The walls feel heavier, and every step echoes with precision. Inmates are led through corridors that appear identical, each turn designed to disorient, each door identical to the next. There is no signage that comforts, no noises that distract. Only the knowledge that this is a place where every movement is observed, recorded, and controlled. The intake process begins slowly. Paperwork is handled efficiently, yet without explanation. Questions are asked, answers are recorded, decisions are made, and all the while, the inmate remains uncertain. Will they be housed in one unit or another? Will their daily routines change? Who will they see and who will they not? The uncertainty is intentional. ADX Florence is designed to make the absence of information feel as tangible as a wall pressing in on every side. Even simple motions, walking to the shower, moving to the dining area, stepping into a small yard, are orchestrated carefully. Guards are present, silent but watchful. The inmate notices every detail, the angle of a door, the spacing of a chair, the echoes of distant steps. Each moment becomes a point of observation, a moment for the mind to record, process, and anticipate. This hyper-awareness of one's surroundings becomes the first lesson in the psychological control ADX Florence exerts. It is subtle, it is constant, it is exhausting. By the end of the first day, the inmate begins to understand that here, time itself is part of the punishment, not violent, not harsh, but oppressive in its persistence. Waiting, observing, anticipating. These are the tools of control. Every action, even inaction, carries meaning, and every moment stretches long enough that the mind begins to fill the silence with possibilities, fears, and reflections. This is the first stage. The awareness that control begins before confinement is fully realized. The waiting cells. Time is a tool of control. Inside ADX Florence, the cells themselves are carefully designed instruments of psychological influence. Each one is identical in shape, color, and size, yet within their uniformity lies a silent lesson. You are confined, measured, and monitored at all times. There is no decor to distract, no personal effects to create comfort beyond what is strictly allowed. The walls, painted in muted institutional colors, reflect light evenly, denying shadows that might make the space feel softer or more natural. Every corner, every angle is intentional, a constant reminder that the environment itself is part of confinement. The first hours in the waiting cell feel deceptively empty. Meals are delivered at precise intervals. Lights turn on and off without explanation. And the inmate quickly learns that routine is an illusion. Here, nothing is random. Even silence has its purpose. In the absence of noise, every creak of the floor, every distant footstep, every faint clatter resonates unnaturally. The mind begins to focus on things that, outside these walls, might have been ignored. It is a subtle, unrelenting pressure that magnifies anticipation into anxiety. Communication is almost non-existent. Guards speak when necessary, but their tone is clipped and neutral. Fellow inmates are distant, isolated, or separated entirely. And so, the inmate's thoughts become the dominant companion. Hours stretch into days with minimal stimuli. Every glance at the clock, every observation of the cell door, every careful listening for sounds beyond the walls serves as a way to measure time, even when time itself seems suspended. Waiting here is not passive. It is active, consuming, and mentally taxing. Rules that seem simple take on outsized importance. How one moves, where one looks, how one positions oneself in the small space, all of these become acts of negotiation with an invisible authority. A misplaced step, a wrong glance, or even an internal thought revealed in expression can feel like it carries weight. The cell becomes a mirror for mental endurance, and inmates quickly realize that patience and observation are often more critical than speed or reaction. Even the smallest changes are amplified. A shift in the guard's route, a different angle of sunlight through the narrow window, a new set of footsteps echoing from the distant hall. Each tiny variance becomes a potential signal, a cause for speculation, a trigger for internal calculation. The mind races to interpret meaning where none may exist. Here, anticipation itself becomes a punishment, and the longer the wait, the heavier it feels. By the end of the second day, the inmate is beginning to understand the subtle language of ADX Florence. Nothing happens randomly. Silence is not emptiness. Waiting is not idle. Every moment, every pause, every delay has a purpose designed to reinforce control and diminish predictability. The environment, the schedule, and the minimal human interaction form a system where the inmate is constantly assessing, calculating, and preparing, even when no action is required. The cell is no longer just a physical space. It is a classroom of time and patience, and the lesson is relentless. The hallways of anticipation, every step observed. Once an inmate leaves a waiting cell, they enter the hallways of ADX Florence, long, narrow corridors where silence is not merely a background, but an instrument of control. The walls are lined with uniform steel doors, each one identical, each one potential threshold into deeper isolation. The floor is polished and reflective, amplifying even the softest footfall. Every step echoes unnaturally, carrying sound that seems to stretch endlessly down the corridor. Here, movement itself becomes an exercise in calculation, as inmates quickly learn that every motion is observed, recorded, and mentally noted. The journey through these hallways is slow, deliberate, almost ritualistic. Guards flank the inmate at measured intervals, silent and unsmiling. Their eyes sweep the corridor with precision, noting posture, gaze, and reaction. For the inmate, the awareness of constant observation is oppressive. Even when the path seems straightforward, every pause, every glance, every tiny hesitation is magnified in significance. The mind begins to race, not with fear of immediate harm, but with anticipation of consequence, a subtle, pervasive pressure that infiltrates thought and emotion. Along these corridors, sounds are amplified. The click of a key, the hiss of a door latch, the distant echo of another inmate's step. All are signals to decode. All are part of an invisible rhythm. The absence of other sensory cues leave the mind to fill in every silence, creating patterns, narratives, and sometimes anxieties that may not exist. Walking these hallways becomes an exercise in patience and mental endurance, as every step feels deliberate, measured, and potentially consequential. Observation is constant. Cameras, mirrors, and guards create a network of eyes that never blinks. Inmates quickly internalize that every small gesture is scrutinized. The way one stands, the angle of one's head, even the rhythm of breathing becomes part of a silent dialogue with authority. Mistakes are not always punished overtly. Often, the system relies on subtle correction, a shift in procedure, or a redirection of movement. The control is invisible but tangible, creating a heightened sense of vulnerability that extends beyond physical confinement. So after some time, the inmate begins to understand that ADX Florence's hallways are more than mere passageways. They are arenas of psychological challenge, places where anticipation and observation are tools used to erode certainty. The physical act of moving from one point to another is transformed into a mental exercise of endurance, teaching patience, vigilance, and the silent acceptance of unpredictability. Every step taken in these corridors is a lesson in restraint, a test of the mind long before it is tested by isolation or punishment. The isolation within isolation, the true weight of ADX Florence. When an inmate is finally escorted into their long-term holding cell at ADX Florence, it is not a simple transfer. It is a complete redefinition of their world. The cell itself is deliberately minimalistic, a stainless steel sink and toilet, a narrow bed bolted to the floor, a small shelf, and a tiny window that allows only a sliver of light to enter. But this simplicity is deceptive. Every feature is engineered to manipulate perception, prolong awareness, and magnify the effects of isolation. The walls are smooth and colorless, eliminating any visual distraction, while the hard floor reflects sound, amplifying even the faintest noise. Here, the environment itself becomes a teacher, one that instructs through silence, monotony, and subtle pressure. The first hours in the cell are disorienting. Time stretches and contracts unpredictably. The inmate quickly notices the smallest changes. The flicker of the fluorescent light overhead, the faint echo of footsteps in distant corridors, or the way a shadow moves along the wall at different hours. These minor details, seemingly insignificant, become vital cues as the mind desperately searches for patterns in an environment that offers none. Each sound is analyzed. Each movement outside the door is cataloged. In ADX Florence, even stillness is charged with meaning, and the mind is forced to work ceaselessly to fill the silence. Meals arrive without ceremony. A tray is slid through the small slot in the door, left, and collected again in silence. There is no conversation, no acknowledgement, only the ritualized repetition of necessity. Inmates begin to understand that every moment of human interaction is carefully measured, and that the absence of interaction is as deliberate as the presence of guards. Even gestures, posture, and gaze are observed. The rules are invisible yet omnipresent, and compliance is assessed continuously through subtle, unspoken cues. Every day in this cell is punctuated by movement, yet movement is heavily restricted and monitored. Inmates are allowed to exercise in small, enclosed areas for limited periods, always under the watchful eyes of guards. The sound of the door opening, the click of handcuffs, the shuffle of shoes along the corridor, each becomes an event of heightened significance, magnified by the oppressive quiet. In the absence of normal distractions, the mind fixates on the minutiae of existence, often creating tension and anticipation where none was intended. This is a methodical power of ADX Florence, to let the mind generate pressure when the body cannot act. Sleep offers little reprieve. The bed is firm, the room is cold, and the mind is alert, scanning for potential disturbances. Every noise is interpreted as a signal. Every shift in the fluorescent light becomes meaningful. Over time, the inmate learns to anticipate guard movements, the schedule of meal delivery, and even the faint mechanical hum of the building itself. The cell teaches lessons in patience, endurance, and acute observation. Waiting becomes a full-time occupation, and the inmate's own thoughts are often the harshest instructors. The psychological isolation is profound. There are no companions, no casual conversation, no visual cues of life beyond the walls. Every element, the silence, the monotony, the unyielding walls, serves to heighten self-awareness and magnify internal tension. The inmate begins to measure the passage of time through micro-events. The subtle change in lighting, the approach of a guard, the distant echoes of others, the slide of a meal tray. These small markers dominate perception, turning ordinary moments into exercises in vigilance and control. By the second week, the weight of this isolation becomes tangible. Days blur together. Hours stretch endlessly. In the absence of sensory variety, the mind invents its own narratives, fears, and reflections, magnifying a sense of confinement. The cell itself transforms from a simple room into a living, breathing instrument of psychological control. Its power lies not in overt punishment, but in the constant, unrelenting, invisible pressure it exerts on the mind. Here, inmates confront themselves, their thoughts, and their endurance in a way that is unparalleled in the outside world. Even small anomalies carry enormous significance. A slight variation in guard behavior, a new echo, or a fleeting shadow can dominate attention for hours. Every repetition of daily routine reinforces the sense that nothing is accidental, nothing is ignored, and every detail matters. In ADX Florence, control is woven into every second, every object, every silence, creating a relentless cycle of observation, reflection, and anticipation. By the end of this chapter, the inmate has learned the harshest lesson of all, that true isolation is not just physical, but mental. The walls, the silence, and the repetitive routines become instruments of endurance. Every moment is charged with subtle meaning, and every thought becomes a test of resilience. ADX Florence does not rely on spectacle. It relies on the slow, methodical shaping of perception, turning waiting, silence, and monotony into the most potent tools of confinement. The routine of control, life within the invisible walls. By the time an inmate has spent weeks inside ADX Florence, the subtle mechanisms of control become impossible to ignore. The daily routine, which may seem mundane to an outsider, is in fact a carefully orchestrated sequence of events designed to shape behavior and reinforce vigilance. Every hour, every minute, and even every second is measured and monitored, leaving the inmate with little room for mental reprieve. This is a place where predictability and uncertainty coexist, where routines are precise yet psychologically manipulative. The day begins with a measured awakening. Lights may flick on at seemingly arbitrary times, marking the start of a new cycle of observation. The bed is firm, the room cold, and every sound, from the hum of the fluorescent lights to the faint vibration of the plumbing, is amplified in the stillness. Guards move with deliberate silence, noting posture, movement, and even facial expressions. In this environment, the act of existing becomes an exercise in attention, where every gesture is unconsciously evaluated. Meals are delivered with methodical precision. A tray slides through the narrow slot, containing food that is uniform, unvaried, and functional. There is no conversation, no acknowledgement, only the ritual of survival. Inmates learn to anticipate these deliveries, to observe subtle patterns in the timing, and to prepare themselves mentally for each interaction. Even the smallest deviation in procedure, a tray arriving a minute early or late, becomes an event to analyze, a test of situational awareness. Every detail matters, and every pattern is scrutinized by both the staff and the inmate's own mind. Exercise periods, though brief, are equally controlled. The small enclosed area designated for physical activity is monitored closely. Movement are restricted to predefined areas, gestures are observed, and even breathing is registered as part of a continuous assessment. What seems like freedom is, in reality, another layer of psychological pressure, reinforcing that every motion carries significance. The mind is never at rest. Vigilance is constant, and anticipation becomes a persistent companion. Isolation is the silent force that dominates every hour. Fellow inmates are distant, separated, or entirely invisible, leaving the mind to confront itself without distraction. This solitude amplifies every sensory perception, transforming minor noises, a distant footstep, a shifting shadow, a mechanical hum, into potential signals, cues, or threats. Over time, the brain begins to assign meaning to the meaningless, creating tension that is both unavoidable and continuous. This is the essence of ADX Florence, a system where the mind itself becomes both prisoner and observer. Routine is interspersed with unpredictability. Guards may change their patterns, new sounds may emerge, and the schedule may subtly shift. Inmates are acutely aware that adaptability is survival, that every variation could signal a test or measure compliance. Days stretch into nights with no sense of normal passage of time. Sleep is fragmented by both environmental cues and the mental processes of vigilance. In the smallest details, the angle of a shadow, the frequency of a guard's check, the slight vibration of a door latch, the mind remains constantly engaged. Even leisure, such as reading, writing, or thinking, is influenced by the architecture of control. Books, if allowed, are sparse. Writing materials are regulated. Thoughts are heightened by confinement. The cell becomes both a physical and psychological arena, where endurance, attention, and mental resilience are tested ceaselessly. Each day reinforces a reality that freedom is measured in perception, not distance, and that survival depends on patience, observation, and mental fortitude. By the end of weeks or months in this environment, the inmate internalizes a harsh truth. Every routine, every silence, and every minor detail is an instrument of control. The walls, the floor, the faint sounds, the regimented schedules, all converge to create an environment where the mind cannot disengage. Physical confinement is only part of the punishment. The larger force is psychological pressure maintained minute by minute. ADX Florence does not rely on dramatic acts of cruelty. It relies on consistency, precision, and relentless observation, shaping behavior through the subtle, unyielding orchestration of everyday life. The mind under siege, psychological battles behind locked doors. By the time an inmate reaches Chapter 6 of their journey inside ADX Florence, the physical walls are no longer the most pressing barrier. It is the mind itself that becomes both battlefield and prisoner. Every hour of isolation, every regimented movement, and every monotony-infused routine has a cumulative effect. The mind, starved of normal social and sensory input, begins to create its own challenges, imagining threats, rehearsing conversations, and anticipating outcomes that may never come. Here, the isolation is not just external. It is internalized, amplified, and inescapable. The cell is both sanctuary and prison. Its minimalistic furnishings, a small bed, a stainless steel sink and toilet, a shelf, and a narrow window, are constant reminders of limitations. Yet, in these confines, the mind cannot afford rest. Sounds echo unnaturally. The distant hum of the fluorescent lights, the faint clank of metal from another wing, the subtle vibration of pipes beneath the floor. Each noise is magnified, analyzed, and sometimes misinterpreted. Over time, the brain assigns significance to trivialities, turning the smallest event into a source of stress, suspicion, or anticipation. Routine continues with the same precision and control as before. Meals arrive through the slot, exercise is brief and monitored, and guards observe every action with silent scrutiny. Even the rhythm of breathing becomes conscious. Every movement is calculated, every gesture observed, leaving the inmate in a perpetual state of alertness. The absence of casual conversation, the lack of human warmth, and the rigid environment force the mind to confront itself endlessly. In this place, the inmate is both the observer and the observed, constantly analyzing actions, reactions, and thoughts in an environment designed to amplify internal tension. Sleep offers little relief. The body may lie on the firm bed, but the mind remains vigilant. Shadows stretch unnaturally. Subtle sounds invade consciousness, and light changes become signals rather than neutral events. The inmate's sense of time becomes distorted, with minutes stretching into hours and hours into days. Dreams, if they occur, are punctuated by the echo of footsteps or the imagined presence of guards. Even in rest, the mind is engaged in survival, pattern recognition, and silent negotiation with itself. Psychological strategies, both conscious and subconscious, begin to form. Inmates may pace their small cells, rehearse mental scenarios, or create elaborate routines for entertainment and mental stability. Imagination becomes both ally and adversary. The brain invents narratives, conversations, and tasks to occupy itself. Yet every imagined scenario is infused with tension, anticipation, or anxiety. The isolation fosters creativity and cognitive resilience, but also amplifies stress, hypervigilance, and uncertainty, creating a complex internal landscape that the inmate must navigate continually. Interaction with guards remains minimal yet critical. Even brief visual contact, the shifting of keys in a lock, or the movement of a tray, becomes a signal laden with potential meaning. The mind is trained to interpret every event, no matter how small, and to anticipate responses. This constant analysis is exhausting, but necessary for survival. Over time, it becomes second nature, a mechanism of mental endurance that reinforces control through awareness and anticipation rather than direct confrontation. By the end of this chapter, the inmate realizes the true essence of ADX Florence. The physical confinement is only half the challenge. The larger battle is internal. The relentless routines, the controlled sensory input, the isolation, and the regimented monitoring converge to test mental endurance continuously. Every moment is an exercise in patience, vigilance, and psychological resilience. Every second spent in this environment reinforces the understanding that survival here requires not just physical compliance, but complete mastery over the mind's reactions to confinement. Isolation, monotony, and control have transformed the inmate's perception of reality. ADX Florence teaches that true captivity is as much about perception and anticipation as it is about locked doors. The mind, stripped of external distractions and comfort, becomes both weapon and target, enduring an unrelenting psychological trial that challenges the very essence of human patience, focus, and resilience. ADX Florence, the architecture of isolation and the strength of a human mind. As the gates of ADX Florence close behind another day, the lessons of the prison are etched not only into the physical environment, but also into the psyche of those within. From the narrow steel corridors to the soundless, echoing cells, every element is meticulously designed to challenge, control, and test. It is not a place of spectacle or theatrics. It is a place where time itself becomes a tool of confinement, and where the mind is the ultimate battleground. The true power of ADX Florence lies in its subtlety. It does not rely on grand gestures or overt violence. Instead, it enforces control through silence, repetition, and invisibility. The clanging of doors, the mechanical hum of fluorescent lights, the measured footsteps of guards, all seem ordinary at first glance. Yet within these ordinary elements exists a carefully calculated architecture of mental pressure designed to sharpen awareness, heighten anticipation, and cultivate resilience under extreme conditions. Every day spent inside these walls reinforces a profound reality. Freedom is not measured by distance, but by the mind's ability to endure. Inmates confront themselves in ways impossible in the outside world. Their thoughts become arenas of strategy, observation, and self-assessment. Every gesture, every movement, every small interaction is a test of patience and focus. Even in isolation, the human mind is active, analytical, and alert, learning to navigate a world designed to leave it constantly vigilant. ADX Florence demonstrates the extraordinary resilience of human psychology. Faced with constant observation, regimented routines, and sensory deprivation, inmates adapt, creating internal structures of control and stability. Their minds become landscapes of endurance, imagination, and meticulous planning. Some develop coping mechanisms. Others fall prey to the relentless psychological pressure. In all cases, the prison's design ensures that the mental struggle is never optional. It is inevitable, pervasive, and unrelenting. As the doors swing closed at the end of each day, the lessons extend beyond the walls. Observers, researchers, and viewers alike gain insight into the delicate balance of power, psychology, and environment. The prison is more than steel, concrete, and security systems. It is an ecosystem of control where every sound, shadow, and routine shapes human behavior. It teaches that survival in isolation is as much about mental resilience as it is about physical endurance. ADX Florence is a place where minutes stretch into hours, hours into days, and days into months. Yet in this compression of time, the human spirit demonstrates an extraordinary ability to adapt, endure, and survive. The mundane becomes meaningful, the routine becomes rigorous training, and the isolation becomes a canvas for psychological testing. In the absence of companionship, the mind creates its own structure, its own purpose, and its own resilience. As this documentary draws to a close, the reality of life within ADX Florence remains stark and profound. It is a prison of extremes, extreme control, extreme isolation, and extreme testing of human endurance. Yet it is also a testament to the strength of the human mind, the ability to observe, adapt, and persevere even under the most challenging conditions. The steel walls may confine the body, but it is the mind that ultimately defines survival. ADX Florence is more than a prison. It is a masterclass in the subtle power of control, the psychological weight of isolation, and the enduring resilience of those confined within. From the echoing corridors to the shadowed cells, the story is clear. Freedom is measured not in space, but in the mind's ability to withstand silence, monotony, and vigilance. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe. Your engagement supports the continuation of these in-depth explorations into the world's most secure and psychologically complex prisons. Stay tuned for more behind-the-scenes insights into the systems that test the limits of human endurance, resilience, and observation.